The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Easter Sunday. I never know what to do exactly with Easter. Strange holiday. But anyway, thank you for joining me. Weather here is gorgeous. Beaches are packed, as always. Hope you're experiencing a pleasant and nice weekend. All right, a lot to talk about today, but let me start with just apologizing for yesterday. It's like all the tech problems one could imagine hit all at once. The internet was spotty. I don't know what was going on with my internet provider, and then something was going on with some of the software. I finally figured out. I finally fixed Zoom. Zoom was giving me problems for about a week, so I finally think I've got Zoom figured out. It's working. So I apologize. Now I know a lot of you submitted Super Chat questions yesterday for Greg. So Greg is going to join me maybe tomorrow, maybe later in the week, maybe next week. But Greg will join me, and we will go over those questions and finish them and take more questions and talk about more issues in the next few days. So, I'll let you know when that's going to happen. Follow me on Twitter, and you will be able to stay abreast of when Greg is going to come back. So we did splice the yesterday's show. We took out all the noise and spliced the two segments that were on two different streams together. So the version of the show that's going up right now, hopefully has gone up or will go up soon, is a clean version. So if you'd like to hear Greg's comments on Donald Hoffman's idea that we don't experience reality, we don't see reality, our senses don't give evidence about reality. The Kantian idea in the guise of evolutionary biology, in the guise of science, you can play that and you'll get Greg's discussion of it, I think, with hopefully little technical problems, because I think those are being cleaned out and uploaded. Jonathan, thank you. Thank you for the support. All right, remember to like the show before you leave, and remember to use the Super Chat feature to both support the show and, of course, ask questions. Happy to take questions. And the $20 and above, particularly above, get priority in terms of answering those questions. You can also support the show by going to yaronbrookshow.com/support, by going to Patreon, Subscribestar, Locals. You can support the show on any one of those platforms. I love the support I get on those platforms. It's monthly, it's regular. I know exactly what's coming. You can plan accordingly. I also love the Super Chat. It's become a significant source of support for the show. So thank you for those of you who engage and participate in it, and I very, very much appreciate it. So again, don't forget to like the show before you leave if you like the show. Let's see. Oh yes, a few other things. If you'd like to sponsor a show, a particular show, you get the sponsorship. We can make it anonymous. We can make it in your name. We can make it in your company's name. However you want to do it. You get to choose the topic within reason, and that is $1,000. We have a sponsor show coming up about heroism. I'll be doing that one again in the next few days. I'll let you know exactly when, maybe on Wednesday, if not next weekend. And John has sponsored that show, and of course, if you guys would like any other show sponsored, feel free to jump in. All right. Easter. I don't know what to make of this holiday. Why is Good Friday good when that's the day Jesus is crucified? Are you supposed to celebrate that, his crucifixion? I get Sunday as a celebration because that's when he gets resurrected, but I don't get this. I mean, Passover makes sense. It's like Passover is like this holiday where you celebrate liberation from slavery, getting all those Egyptians off your back and heading towards the land of the free, Israel. And it's all about freedom from slavery. That's all you do in Passover. And it's all the symbolism and everything. Everything is around that. So while I don't celebrate it, I get it. Easter's like this oppressive, horrible celebration of somebody getting crucified. I find that just awful. But the good news, and there was good news last week about Easter, but generally about, I guess, American culture. The good news is that there was a new poll that came out on the 29th, so the day after Palm Sunday. I have no idea what Palm Sunday is supposed to celebrate. But anyway, the day after Palm Sunday, there was a new poll released by Gallup about church attendance in the United States, or church membership, not church attendance, church membership in the United States. And it's quite shocking to those of you who might be religious or might be regular church attendees or might be committed to your religion, because church attendance across Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is at historic lows. I mean, but dramatically so. It's under 50%. It's 47% for the first time ever since the survey's been taken in the late 1930s. Church membership is under 47% of the population. It peaked at 76% right after World War II. It was 70% as late as 1999. But since 1999-2000, since the evangelical George Bush presidency, we have seen a steady, almost constant, maybe with the exception of the financial crisis, constant, steady decline in church membership from 70% to 47%. And that's an astounding decline. Now, that does not represent the number who are, somebody says that COVID-related. Probably not. It doesn't look like it's, and I don't know what the lag on the poll is. I didn't look to see when the poll was actually conducted, but it looks like it was under 50% 2 years ago. So like it was maybe 49% or around 50%. So no, this is a steady decline. It's a steady decline since 1999. It's been going down steadily, and then it seems to have accelerated since 2010 under Obama, under Trump. I mean, just a steady decline in church membership. And I think there are a couple of causes for this. Some of this is good. Some of it is not clear it's good. I think the main reason for this is while the number of people who claim no religious affiliation is at an all-time record, I think that number is 21%. Let me just see. I've got the survey right here. So of no religious affiliation has gone to 21%. So it used to be 8% in 98, 2000. Then it was 13% for 08 to 10. Now it's 21%. So the number of people who have no religious affiliation, no church affiliation, that doesn't mean they're not religious. It means no formal religion. They don't categorize themselves as Protestants or Catholic or Muslims or Jews. They still might be spiritual. They still might believe in God. They still might be something else. Who knows? But it's 20. Very few of those consider themselves atheists. But 21%. So that's a part of it. But the other part is just all the scandals. I think all the church scandals, starting from the Catholic Church. I mean, if raping young boys, I mean, not just here and there, but systematically and over long periods of time, and cover-ups of that, would not alienate you from a church that claims the high moral ground, would not alienate you from a church that claims the virtue of celibacy, then I'm not sure exactly what will. So it strikes me that the Catholic Church is seeing a significant decline in attendance because of all the sex scandals and all the the sex with children scandals, and this is probably going on for hundreds of years, but it's finally come out. And if you think about the scandals like in Ireland of how they treated women who had children out of birth, and they kept them in these homes, and the children were given away, and some of the children died, and just the abuse these women went through. I mean, the Catholic Church has a lot to atone for, and a lot of I think people are upset and want to have nothing to do with this church, and I find it strange and weird that people are still affiliated with the Catholic Church. I think the Catholic Church should die completely. Now, what's interesting is the people still affiliated with it tend to be the intellectuals. It tends to be most of the intellectuals on the right are Catholics, which is interesting. Then, if you look at the Protestants, if you look at the evangelical community, I mean, I haven't talked about this, but I follow David French. He has one of these Substacks, so he has like a regular blog. And one of the things French documents on a regular basis is the abuses within the evangelical church, the sex scandals against some of them with children, the fraud, the money. I mean, we've known this for the televangelist for years, and I think slowly people are starting to say, this is nuts, and leaving those churches. I'd be curious, and maybe I'll dig into the polls more carefully and see if affiliation with synagogue and mosque for the Muslims and Jews is also in decline or not. And it might be a phenomenon of younger people. And again, that would certainly be a positive. But I think the church has not done itself any favors. And given the crazy kind of sex scandals in the Catholic Church and all the crazy kind of scandals, monetary and sexual, on the evangelical, and you saw this guy who just killed all those massage therapists in Atlanta, kind of the purity culture within the evangelical community. I mean, this is sick stuff, and I think it's slowly leading people to potentially abandon all of this. But if you're interested in any of this stuff, I think David French is interesting. He is an evangelical. He is very much an evangelical. He is far from me philosophically, but he is interesting in that he's an honest evangelical, at least in regard to some things, and he sees the real problems within the evangelical movement, and he writes about them. And I find his columns, I find the stuff that he writes really good and interesting. Some of you might not like him because he was a never Trumper, and that probably rules him out for you. But for those of you who are open to the never Trumpers, he's one of the better writers out there, and he writes about these issues from an interesting way, even if you land up not agreeing with them at all. Like a little bit like Andrew Sullivan. But Andrew Sullivan, of course, I think converted to Catholicism. But also is an interesting writer, good writer, but man, do I disagree with Andrew Sullivan on issues. And the same thing happens with Daniel French, but I enjoy reading them in spite of the disagreement. David French tries to spin this whole 47% church attendance for the positive, and basically says, look, what is Easter Sunday all about? Easter Sunday is about resurrection. Christianity has resurrected itself on many occasions. It's been down and come back on many occasions, and so he makes a big deal out of this. So yes, Christianity is the philosophy of the meek, the downtrodden. Christianity is a problem when it gets to power, because power corrupts the church very quickly. The church is corrupt to begin with, but it corrupts the church in ways that the church objects to. So there's always kind of counter-reformations, counter-attempts to kind of reform. The Protestants are, in a sense, a reformation of Christianity. Then there's a counter-reformation within Catholicism. And there's this constant spinning off of Puritans and Pilgrims and all these things to try to purify the church, to try to come back. But it's inevitable that the church has to fail, because its doctrines are doctrines of failure. Brad asks, how do we get from Jesus' sacrificed Easter bunny that hides eggs? I don't know exactly, but it's the same way we got from Jesus' birth to Christmas trees and gift giving. It's all associated with pagan holidays and the fact and Christians stealing pagan holidays. So if you think about Easter, Passover, they're both holidays of springtime. They're both associated with the pagan holidays affiliated with springtime. And springtime is affiliated with fertility. Eggs are affiliated with fertility. There was probably some ancient pagan holiday associated with bunnies and eggs and fertility, virgins or whatever. And all of that is the Christians took elements that were kind of fun and kind of cool and integrated them into Easter. So yes, it has nothing to do with Jesus, right? Jennifer says Egyptians had an Easter-like holiday. Everybody had an Easter-like holiday. I mean, spring is a time. Spring is a time of celebration almost across the pagan world, from the Egyptians to the barbarians in Central Europe to the Northern Europe, across the world. People celebrate spring. It's a rebirth after winter. It's the flowering season, and it's therefore a season associated with sex, and therefore with fertility. So you get that. That's where the Christians get it. So all right, use the super chat feature, guys. We're gonna have a short show. No questions. Don't forget to use it. As I said, I'll be answering the questions from yesterday. And I apologize again for those of you who just joined the show. I apologize again for yesterday's all the technical problems, but I will get to the questions from yesterday with Greg on a show later this week or next week. Roland says, "Happy Easter. I think of it as an original secular holiday whose date the church has appropriated, just like Christmas." Absolutely, absolutely. Most of these holidays, almost all the holidays, are holidays that were appropriated by the church from pagans or from Jewish holidays, right? It's no accident. It's the same time as Passover. It has nothing to do with the actual crucifixion, and it has everything to do with the time of year. All right. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Yeah, the Green Screen Studio Fund is growing slowly. I figure the budget for the Green Screen Studio, I did the calculation, depending on the quality camera I get, is anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000. So that's kind of my target for the studio. My goal is to get a really high-end Sony DSLR with a really good lens and put the green screen in the background. And then the real question will be, is my Mac Mini going to be able to process the green screen smoothly, process the green screen plus the streaming plus everything else smoothly? If it requires me then to upgrade the computer, that might be a significant increase. We'll see. But we'll get a good DSLR. Sound doesn't really need to be changed. You'll get some acoustic treatments of the walls, and we'll get the green paint. We'll have somebody paint it. So it's mainly the acoustic treatment. The paint is about $100. It's the acoustic treatment and the new camera. Oh, and new lights. We'll get some additional lights because you have to light with a green screen. You have to light the screen, and then you have to light me separately. So you need a bunch of different lights in order to make it work. So all of that will be. Yeah, it'll be cool. All right, let's talk about Georgia. Georgia's in the news again. And it's in the news again because of elections, election procedures. And to remind you, Georgia didn't start being in the news about elections in this last election cycle, but the previous election cycle, during the gubernatorial elections in 2018, when Stacey Abrams, who was the Democratic nominee for governor, refused to concede to Governor Brian Kemp, despite losing by more than 50,000 votes. She refused to concede. and then she complained about Trump refusing to concede, right? But she refused to go, and he only lost by 12,000 votes, but she lost by 50,000 votes. Why? Because she claimed that Kemp, when he was Secretary of State, before he ran for governor, he was Secretary of State, had purged hundreds of thousands from the voter rolls, hundreds of thousands of her supporters from the voter rolls. So the first cycle was the Democrats complained that the Republicans won because they had rigged the election, because they had rigged the election to make them win. So Republicans know, according to all of us, that Republicans know how to rig elections, and yet those same Republicans, Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, and the new Secretary of State, and the guy responsible for the elections, I think Spalding is his name, somehow they forgot how to rig elections when it came to the presidential election, and they allowed the Democrats to rig the elections, right? That's the story we are told. And Trump lost Georgia by 12,000 votes. And complained about it, and the Democrats went apoplectic. How dare you complain about it? When 2 years old, previously, they had complained about it. Now, it turns out that Stacey Abrams was wrong, and that President Trump was wrong. And President Trump and all his entourage and the people on here that are claiming election fraud. There just hasn't really been, on scale, I'm not saying there hasn't been any election fraud. There's always some election fraud. But there's no evidence, zero evidence, that there was election fraud on the scale that would reverse an election. And again, every court in the land has ruled the same, including the Supreme Court. And I don't want to debate this again. There just wasn't any election fraud. There wasn't any evidence of large-scale election fraud. There's zero evidence of that actually happening. So, but it's been going back and forth, right? Democrats are complaining, Republicans are complaining, everybody's complaining because nobody likes the results. And whenever you don't like the results, what do? You complain. You complain, right? And so what have the Republicans done? The Republicans, huge under pressure from their constituency to do something because 60% or something of Republicans still believe that Biden didn't win the election. So they're putting pressure on a lot of state legislatures to pass bills that will fix what they believe are the problems with the election. Now, the fact is that the people in charge of writing these laws in Georgia, including the governor, don't actually believe there was a problem during the election, right? And if they, and they've expressed so, and they're the ones actually writing these bills. But they have to, put on a show to the Republican base that they are doing something. So Georgia did a comprehensive kind of new voting laws for the state. And they passed recently. It's Senate Bill 202 that the Governor Kemp, the same governor Stacey Abrams accused of cheating, and then Trump accused him of not supporting Trump and therefore allowing the Democrats to cheat. So, cheating all surrounding Governor Kemp. So Governor Kemp signed this new law into bill. The Democrats went apoplectic, just apoplectic. President Biden has called these new laws un-American. He said that these new laws are basically, quote, Jim Crow in the 21st century. Jim Crow in the 21st century. So let's just remind ourselves what Jim Crow relates to when it comes to election laws. What did Jim Crow have? So in 1877, at a constitutional convention in Georgia, lawmakers implement a cumulative poll tax requiring would-be voters to pay a fee before casting a ballot, basically pricing out of the market for voting all freed slaves who had no income. In 1907, Georgia Governor Huckey Smith signed a bill amending the state constitution to create a literacy test for voting, knowing again that a significant number of Georgian blacks were not literate, right? But what's interesting about the literacy test Anybody who was a descendant from the Confederate or Union soldier, anybody who was an ex-soldier, was exempt. Heirs of the, descendants of. So clearly racist, clearly both were targeted at excluding black voters. A year later, in 1908, Georgia's Democratic Party joined other southern states in establishing a white primary that explicitly prohibited black voters from participating. I mean, these are the real, some, there are many, many more, of the Jim Crow, the evil Jim Crow laws that are a real embarrassment for this country in terms of its history. It's really horrific to imagine that this country had these laws. And yet, the law in Georgia has been the President of the United States, the legally elected President of the United States, one should add, right, is accusing these laws now, the new laws, the laws that just passed, of being Jim Crow in the 21st century. I saw that Stacey Abrams, the same Stacey Abrams, is still very active, obviously, in Georgia politics. 2 weeks before the law passed, bought the domain, knowing that this would become a Democratic talking point. I'm trying to find the domain. I think it was JimCrowLaws2.0.com, something like that. She bought the domain 2 weeks before to make this a big issue. Now, I am reading about this law primarily from sources that were extremely unfriendly to Trump, because I didn't want like the traditional conservative or Trump people defending these laws. I wanted people who actually thought that Biden won the election. I wanted their view of what this law was about. So according to them, the bill actually expands voting access for most Georgians. It mandates that precincts hold at least 17 days of early voting, including 2 Saturdays, with Sundays as optional. People, the opponents of this law on the Democratic side, the ones who call it Jim Crow, are saying, oh, they're excluding Sundays because I guess blacks tend to vote right after church on Sunday. But they can vote on Saturday. They can vote every other day of the week. 17 days of early voting. The voting booths during this early voting have to be open at least 8 hours. Between 7 a.m., they have to operate between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. 8 hours between those 2 hours. Some states, including deep blue states, I always have to remember the colors of which party is which color, because don't have in-person early voting at all. New Jersey, Delaware, for example. Well, no, New Jersey has it before fewer than 17 days. Delaware has none. So Georgia's 17 days. It leaves in place one of Trump's main complaints about voting in Georgia and elsewhere. The absentee ballot, the no-excuse absentee ballot. The law leaves that in place. It tweaks it a little bit. It tightens the window to apply for an absentee ballot to just 67 days, over 2 months. You have to complete it online. You now have to complete the application online, or you can do it online. And you received, the application has to be received at least 11 days before an election to ensure that you get it in time and it gets returned on time. All reasonable. There's nothing crazy about this. It prohibits government agencies from mailing an absentee ballot to voters unsolicited. Again, not crazy. You could argue either way, but not a crazy idea. Jim Crow? I don't see Jim Crow anywhere here. Let's see. One second, let me just copy paste this thing. All right, done. Let's see, what else? What else? All right, so they've abandoned signature matching. Signature matching is a mess. I mean, you wouldn't want to match my signature. I mean, it's just too hard. And it's time intensive, and it's just difficult to do. Instead, they're going to actually demand some identity. So the absentee ballots, you're going to have to use all these ballots, you're going to have to use a driver's license, a voter identification card, which are free in Georgia. And you can include a photocopy of a utility bill, a bank statement, a government check, any one of these things. So they're trying to make it as easy as possible, but they're trying to make sure that you are who you are, which seems very reasonable to me in terms of voting. Again, some states don't have ID checks. Some states do. But again, Jim Crow, you could argue either way, maybe, although I think IDs make complete sense. But Jim Crow, this is nutty. It allows, for the first time in Georgia, election workers to begin processing absentee ballots 2 weeks before an election to avoid reporting delays like we saw in this last election, and requires them to announce the total number of ballots cast in person, absentee, early, and provisional by 10 p.m. on election night, so that you have a lot more visibility into the process. And as soon as the polls close, we can get the results of the absentee votes, because those will be counted like we did in Florida. You remember we got all the absentee votes? So it looked like early on in the night, Florida was going to go to Biden. And then all the in-person votes came in, and it flipped to Trump. In Georgia, it was the opposite. Because they got the in-person votes first, it went Trump first. And then as the absentee coming in, it flipped back to Biden. There was nothing unusual about that. It was just a matter of what order they were counting the votes. So here they're putting in rational means by which to count the votes to make it so that we get a smoother reporting of the votes. They don't allow you to give out food or drink 150 foot from a polling place, or 25 feet from voters standing in line to vote. The Democrats are freaking out over this because they say this will discourage people standing in line to vote because they'll be dehydrated or whatever. And again, Jim Crow, these people are nuts, completely nuts. And this is the President of the United States making this argument. Now, it's true that early on in the drafting process of this, there were some pretty wacky ideas presented by some Georgia senators. They were trying to appease their base, and they threw out there all kinds of stuff to really suppress the vote. But none of those passed. None of those are passed part of the bill. Oh yeah, so the URL is jimcrow2.com. She secured that 2 weeks before. And what's interesting about defense of this bill is that if you remember, I don't know if you guys remember this guy Sterling, who was this election official, a Republican, whose life was being threatened, being harassed by the Trump people, and really went out, if you remember, I think in the Senate steps of the Georgia Senate, and condemned the Trump people for what they were doing, and said the election was fair and there are no issues, and what was going on was horrific and completely unjustified. And he's come out. Remember, this is a guy who was very anti-Trump in that context. He's come out and said, this is what he says, look, I'm quoting, look, Democrats have found a wonderful fundraising and turnout model based on one particular thing: voter suppression, racist voter suppression. And it works. It works in Georgia in 2020, and it's part of the rationale also behind H.R. 1. That's the bill going through Congress right now. He says, this is not a bill I think is the best bill in the whole world. Which bill is? He says, a lot of this is about pure politics and payback and all kinds of stuff. But he says, it's not a Jim Crow 2.0. Some of the provisions of the bill, by the way, target. This is Republicans getting back at. You remember the Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger who stood up to Trump. Well, he's dead. I mean, he's finished in Republican politics, and the bill demotes him, demotes the Secretary of State position significantly. So that's just Republicans getting back at each other, and that's why he's saying it's not ideal. Anyway, the thing is, it's not just the President of the United States and Democratic officials. Corporate America is flipped out. Coca-Cola, which is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, says that it does not support this legislation as it makes it harder for people to vote, not easier. Not clear that that's true at all. The chief executive of Delta Airlines wrote that he, quote, needs to make it crystal clear that the final bill is unacceptable and does not match Delta's values. Biden has encouraged the Major League Baseball not to hold its annual All-Star game in Atlanta this summer. Quote, this is Jim Crow on steroids, what they're doing in Georgia. Sterling writes, I think it is morally reprehensible. I mean, he's quoted as saying this. I think it's morally reprehensible and disgusting that he's perpetuating economic blackmail over a lie. So there you have it. I'm not an election expert. I don't know if this is the best election bill possible. But from everything I have read about it, from a number of sources, a source in the Washington Post, sources at the Dispatch from which I was reading, I think the Dispatch is pretty good on these kind of things. This bill is not a bad bill, and it's not a bill that justifies this insanity. There's another bill I think that was passed by Kentucky that is very similar, and also people are freaking out over it, right? Also, that bill in Kentucky is going to is going to allow for early votings over 3 days. Remember, the Georgia won 17. In Kentucky, it's 3 days. It's going to make it a regular part, which Kentucky never had early voting. It's going to make it a regular part of future elections. The bill is going to expand access to the ballot in a number of different ways, and yet everybody's freaking out. Why? Because it's Republican legislatures, and everybody assumes that they're just beholden to the Trump conspiracy theory nuts, some of whom are on my chat, and therefore, they're going to write bills that are completely insane. Right. Anyway, so the whole Georgia mess is the Democrats trying to rile up their base. It's truly disgusting that some in the leftist media are buying into this and supporting this. But now we have both the right and the left completely engaged in fake news around elections, in assuming, right, that anytime they lose an election, they can cry out that this is all fake news. That this is all stolen elections, that it's rigging, it's voter suppression, it's all of this stuff. I don't think either side has a case for this, at least not based on what I've seen out of Georgia and out of Kentucky so far. Jeremy Morton says on the chat, New York Times had a good article about this, spelling out things in the bill. Yes, I mean, there's some decent reporting about this, while it strikes me that the left, or certain elements on the left, are freaking out over it. Again, I think it's a pure cynical tactic to be able to say when they lose, see, that's why we lost. Exactly what the Republicans would do and are doing in various contexts. So I don't think this is really that different. Limbeck, thank you. Really appreciate the support. That's very generous. All right. So let's see. Any questions about the Georgia election laws? Anything associated with that? I don't see any. I don't see anything in the super chat over that. But again, feel free to use the super chat to ask questions about pretty much anything. Let's quickly take these two super chat questions. They were both $20 questions, 20 plus. So let's take them, and then we'll talk about antitrust and free speech. Why were the communists more hostile to religion than the Nazis? The Nazis seemed to want to keep religion around as a supporting role, where the communists wanted to wipe it out completely. I think because the communists had a total theory that basically replaced religion. That is, they had this whole Marxist ideology that basically replaced God with a proletarian, replaced sacrifice to God with sacrifice to the workers of the world, created their own pope, the dictatorship of the proletarian, and basically had an entire religion built up, a religion taken on faith that required the same kind of philosopher king that religion requires. And in that sense, they covered the whole gamut. They covered the whole thing. They didn't need religion. There was no purpose for religion. They also claimed to be rebelling against an entire Western tradition, Western philosophical tradition, Western thinking tradition, a tradition of exploitation. And they were the inevitable evolution, in a Hegelian sense. They were the inevitable evolution, and they were going to be the dominant ideology globally, the entire world. So there was no meaning anymore to Western civilization. Western civilization was out. Communism was in it. Communism was global, and communism was going to be in Africa, it was going to be in Asia, it was going to be in Europe, and it was going to be in America, it was going to be everywhere. It was the ultimate, right? And therefore, the whole idea of religion associated with Western civilization was no longer needed, was no longer necessary. We had evolved from it, away from it, ideologically. The Nazis, on the other hand, viewed themselves as, in a sense, the heirs of a Western tradition, which the rest of the world, in a sense, had abandoned. While much of their mythology came from German ancient mythology, they weren't exactly about to resurrect paganism. And while they had a set of ideas centered around the supremacy of the Aryan race, centered around nationalism, it wasn't a universalist position because it was about Aryans and Aryans only. So there still was this universalist religion out there that it wasn't clear that they had any motivation or any incentive to condemn because they didn't really have anything to replace it. They weren't offering the world an alternative to Christianity. They were only offering the German people or the Aryan people, the Aryans, however you want to call them, about a replacement for them, and not a replacement so much as an extension of what Western civilization would have to lead to, because Germans were at the center of what Western civilization was and had been forever. They were the heirs of the Greeks and the Romans. They wanted that connection, right? And they used Christianity, and they needed Christianity for their symbolism and for coalescing the German people and not being too revolutionary. I mean, part of their appeal, part of the Nazi appeal, and this might sound familiar to some of you, part of the Nazi appeal was that they were not the left. Part of the Nazi appeal that they were not these communist, atheist, secularist, nihilists as they presented the left. They were for tradition and values and German values and history and continuation and grandeur and so on, right? So I think that's the reason they needed Christianity. And the commies didn't. The commies were explicitly replacing Christianity. And I think partly that's why I mean, partly that's why communism survived for longer, because it was a universalist alternative to Christianity, which had universalist, broad, global appeal. And it wasn't clear to people. They didn't want to go back to religion. What was the alternative to communism? Well, capitalism, everybody rejected. But what was the alternative to communism? And that's part of why there weren't forces as dedicated to fighting communism. I mean, Hitler went to war, and partially he went to war because that was the only way he could survive. He was bankrupt. He was going nowhere. He had no ideology without enemies. He needed a war to survive because he lacked ideology, because he lacked in integrating ideas. Right. All right. Now I know why you don't like Robert Reich, Huron, but what about his childhood friend, Peter Schwerner? I don't know who Peter Schwerner is. I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry, somebody asked a question and I really don't get it. Now I know why you don't like... Now I know why you don't like Robert Reich. I mean, shouldn't it be obvious why I don't like Robert Reich? Right? It's pretty straightforward why I don't like Robert Reich. You're on, but what about his childhood friend Michael Schwerner and the people he tried to help? I don't know anything about this, so can't answer it. What do you think of the term woke capitalism as a part of corporation aligning with cancel culture? Josh Hawley recently used it in describing how Coca-Cola and MLB are boycotting Georgia election rules, term package deal. Yeah, I mean, woke is not really a concept. It's kind of a vague term to describe a certain attitude on the left. I don't think it can really apply to capitalism, to corporations, and certainly it shouldn't be aligned with capitalism. I mean, it would fit Josh Hawley, who has no clue what capitalism is, and it is a rejecter of capitalism wholeheartedly, to associate the term capitalism with woke. You could say these corporations are behaving in a woke fashion. That's fine. You can say these corporations are towing the democratic line as virtue signaling. That's fine. But woke is not a concept. Nobody's defined it. It's not. There's no clear definition or even clear description of what it means. It's applied to a variety of different things, and it's primarily applied to the left. And in terms of corporations, yeah, I mean, corporations have done this forever. How many corporations threatened the NFL around taking the knee, right, on the right? How many people when Kaepernick took the knee and football players took the knee? How many corporations said they wouldn't advertise or they wouldn't be associated? You know, corporations take political stands depending who's president, depending on where they think the wind is blowing. It's pragmatism. It's awful. But it's... don't make too much out of it. Is Coca-Cola and Delta really going to move their headquarters out of Atlanta? I doubt it. They're going to make some, comments to show that they're on the right side of political correctness, and then they're going to close their mouths because Georgia is still a primarily Republican state. They don't want to piss off their customers in Georgia. So they're not going to make too big of a deal. Imagine if Republican Georgians stop flying Delta. That won't be good for Delta, and Delta knows it. So they're going to be very, very cautious. Right? Somebody says, isn't woke an acceptance of the basics of communist net worldview? Not at all. I don't think woke and communism have any connection. Indeed, wokeism is anti-communist because the communists, certainly the communist ideology is anti-woke. Woke has a lot more to do with critical race theory, with postmodernism, with nihilism, and the complete, just the what's it called, intersectionality, than it does with Marxism or communism. Marxism is not postmodern. Marxism is not critical race theory. Marxism is not intersectionality. These things, in a sense, are much worse than Marxism. They are real egalitarianism in a way that communism is not, right? I don't want to pretend for 1 second that anybody think I'm defending communism, but communism is way ahead in every respect than intersectionality, critical race theory, wokeism, if you want to call it that, all of this. This is about nihilism. This is about tearing stuff down. This is about destroying. Communism at least has the pretense of utopia as a goal in the end. What is the utopia of critical race theory? What is utopia of postmodernism? What is utopia of wokeism? There is no such thing. There is no such thing. It is the annihilation of anybody who's a little bit better than anybody else, which means everybody. It's the annihilation of everybody until the last, weakest person on planet Earth is left. Right? So there is, maybe somebody has a definition of woke, but I haven't seen one. It's very vague. It's very questionable about whether it's a term that people throw out there for what we used to call political correctness, but much worse, right? And it includes the whole cancel culture affiliated with it. And it's a bunch of different things. It's not a package deal because there's no positives that go into the woke. Woke is all negative. It's a bad attitude, but I don't think it's a clear-cut, definable term. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I certainly don't think that it has anything to do with communism. Communists believe in discrimination, all kinds of discrimination, based on all kinds of parameters. All right, let's see. I think this is Jeremy says, I'd like to see a show with James Valiant about his book, Creating Christ. Yeah, I'll try to do that. Although, sponsoring a show costs $1,000. But I'll talk to James. Maybe we can do that. That'll be interesting. I haven't read the book. So if I do the show, I have to read the book. So I have to find the time to read the book. But once I read the book, I'd really like to do that. I find that period in history interesting. And his thesis doesn't surprise me. I mean, I don't have any view on it because I'm not an expert on that period in history, but it doesn't surprise me in a sense that religion was politicized. Religion was politicized. All right, we need a lot more support for the show right now, so you guys need to get your act together on the Super Chat. You can also support the show on Patreon, on Subscribestar. You can support your show on YaronBrookShow.com/support. But Super Chat is the most visible way you can support the show, and you can do that right now if you so choose. Don't forget to like the show. There's like 130 plus people watching and only 64 likes. I don't think that's because the other 70 people don't like the show. I think it's because you just haven't bothered to press the like button. Press the like. Press the button, Max. That's a trivia question. Anybody know where Press the Button Max comes from? What movie is Press the Button Max from? It'll be interesting to see if there's anybody in the Super Chat that knows where the Press the Button Max, and then there's not that button. Anyway, let's see. Oh, I want to talk about antitrust and the First Amendment. Thank you, no. No, it's not from Get Smart. Not from Get Smart. So one of the things that Biden has made very clear is that he is going to staff both the Justice Department and the various agencies in government with people who are going to be aggressive when it comes to antitrust. It's clear that the Biden administration wants to go after big tech from the perspective of antitrust. And I think they're going to be joined in this by the Republicans. So I don't think this is going to be very difficult. But certainly the Democrats want to do this. By the way, Ian wins the prize. I'm not sure what the prize is exactly, but he got this right. It's interesting. Usually I get a number of people getting the answer right, but Ian is the only one who got the answer for this one. It is The Great Race. The Great Race is the source of what I say when I say press the button, Max. it's a, you know, I love that movie's a lot of fun. It's an incredibly funny, enjoyable movie. Jack Lemmon plays like 76 different parts in it. He plays, oh my God, he's so funny and so good in this movie. He's really, really good. All right. Anyway, so one of the people that Biden has nominated for the National Economic Council is a guy named Timothy Wu, who is a Columbia law professor. And he is known as an advocate for using antitrust to break up big tech. Indeed, he has a book. He has a book called The Curse of Bigness, Antitrust in the New Gilded Age. So he's a huge, staunch advocate of antitrust. A number of others that have been appointed are also antitrust advocates and for breaking up big tech. And indeed, Amy Klobuchar, who is one of the more moderate senators in the Democratic Party, has already introduced a regulatory legislation that would target companies like Facebook and Google, for breakup because of their size, because of their antitrust. Mark, you got it right, but I think that we got Ian. Ian was first, and then Mark also got the Great Race right. So it's clear that antitrust is going to be a big issue for the Biden administration. It started to be for Trump. A number of proceedings against Facebook and a number of other, and I think against Google, was started under Trump. But he never got the momentum. He was never engaged enough or focused enough to really make this a big issue. The real fear is that Biden has the time, the energy, the focus, and the people surrounding him that are really going to make antitrust a big issue. But this is one of the twists in this. This guy Wu is not only a big pro-antitrust guy. He is also really, really, really anti-free speech. He actually thinks that the First Amendment needs to be revisited. So not just free speech in the sense that many Republicans or people on the right claim, we need to find a way to regulate speech on the internet. We'll see that he ultimately comes to that conclusion. But he actually believes that we need to reinterpret the First Amendment. He wrote an article in September 2017 called "Is the First Amendment Obsolete?" where he says that traditional speech freedoms need to be rethought in the internet or Trump era, right? So this is a guy who thinks the government should get involved in what we can and cannot say. He's argued that the government should strive to create a 1950s-like media landscape. Now, that is super scary, partially because in the 1950s, the media and our political class were hand in hand. The media was not particularly critical of our political class. It was everybody was in this together. I mean, that started changing in the 1960s. But in the 1950s, there were 3 television stations, there were a few big newspapers, there was no talk radio, there was no other alternative media, there was no internet. And you basically had a party line, or within a certain spectrum, it was a party line. Now, so we've got a guy, and we've got a few people, I think, in the Biden administration who would like to actually see the government get much more involved in regulating speech, like Trump. I've always said Trump and the left have a lot in common. Like Trump, they didn't like fake news. They would like to be able to regulate fake news. They would like to regulate foreign interference in the sense of foreign propaganda. They would like, I mean, he explicitly says he wants to broaden the First Amendment to give the government more power over things like fake news, over things like foreign propaganda. which would completely eviscerate the First Amendment. But this is the problem that the left and Trump had with going after the First Amendment. The current Supreme Court won't have any of it. They won't tolerate it. The current Supreme Court, to its great credit, and this is true of the people on the right, the conservatives and the liberals on the court, but primarily the conservatives, are very hostile to any attempt to water down the First Amendment. So there is a real solid support for the First Amendment at the Supreme Court. So you can't really get any laws. You're not going to modify it. You'd have to have a constitutional convention. It would be almost impossible to actually get the courts to change, to allow a significant change in the interpretation of the views on the First Amendment. So what can you do? And there's another problem that they face. Let's say they use their antitrust power to break up Facebook, to break up YouTube, to break up Twitter. Let's say they manage to break up all the big tech, Google and Apple and Microsoft. And they create a splintered, diverse group of companies. The problem then is that, again, given the Supreme Court's position of free speech, how are they going to have any impact on speech? Whose arm are they going to twist in order to toe the party line, in order to bring about, the kind of policies traditionally associated with the 20th century journalism? How are they going to do that? You see, one of the beauties of having big tech, and I think both Republicans and Democrats are starting to realize this, and maybe this is the countervailing force against breaking them up. One of the advantages of having big tech is that big tech can be controlled. Big tech can be manipulated. Big tech can be harassed. So if you had 100 Facebooks, there'd be no way to control what is actually being said. But if there's one Facebook, and you harass him, and you keep bringing Zuckerberg in for questioning, and you create all kinds of committees to investigate and harass, then what you might be able to get Zuckerberg to propose, as if it's his proposal, is maybe a committee, maybe overseen by the government, but not officially, because that would be a violation of free speech, but unofficially, that will propose guidelines about what is allowed on Facebook and what is not allowed on Facebook. And then you can control free speech without actually controlling free speech. This is what's being called censorship by proxy. But the beauty here is you get the companies to, quote, voluntarily do it, to voluntarily propose it in lieu of being harassed. And for that, you want the fewest company possible, because you can't do it with 100 companies. But if it's just Twitter and Facebook and Google, well, that's easy. Just harass them until they change their policies to fit your political agenda. And of course, once you do that, it just becomes part of the culture. And then when Republicans are there, the companies will shift their positioning to be more attuned with the Republicans, and Democrats will shift their position to be more attuned with Democrats. But in the meantime, because of government intervention, because of government pulling the string in the background, our freedom of speech gets dissolved. And while to some extent this has been going on for a long time, now it's starting to be codified. Codified. The government now, the Democratic Party in particular, but it's both, because Ted Cruz is on this as well. The government now wants these social media companies to take down posts of a certain nature and to keep up posts of a certain nature. They want politicians to control the behavior of these social media. So Ted Cruz wants to be able to tell Twitter not to deplatform certain people. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to Facebook, inspired by her, to take down what she thinks are lies and to keep up what she doesn't think are lies. You know, she said in one of these questioning Facebook, she says, so you won't take down lies or you will take down lies? Or why do you label Daily Caller, a publication well documented with ties to white supremacists, it's weird, as an official fact checker for Facebook? So she wants to tell Facebook who should be the fact checkers. Now, she won't do that by law because Facebook will charge that that is a violation of free speech, and it is. It's just like it's a violation of free speech for the right to insist that, I don't know, that Trump keep his Twitter account. And they don't, because they know they can't force Twitter to do it because it's free speech. Part of Twitter's free speech is to decide who can tweet and who can't. But because government has such an impact on companies from an economics perspective, right? Because it has such power on its economics, because it has the power to break these companies up, because it can squeeze them in a variety of ways, the more power it has on these businesses, the more likely it is that these businesses will toe the party line. It's like Coca-Cola and Delta towing the Democratic Party line in Atlanta. Well, if Democrats are in charge, then you can expect Facebook and other tech companies to toe the party line much more. The danger here is, of course, that it is an issue of speech, or can be an issue of speech. And here's where it would be great if we, had more competition. So far, this tugging at Facebook and Google and so on has been in the background. But what the Biden administration is trying to do is make it more explicit. What Congress, under the Democrats, are trying to do is make it more explicit. And part of this is going to be associated with getting rid of, 230, the protection these platforms have, and then because they're now exposed to liability, they're going to have to negotiate with the government. There are other things. There are all kinds of protections from liability that the government can remove in order to have more influence in these companies. Right? So we're going to see more and more and more of this interplay and tension between, on the one hand, the Democrats wanting to break up big tech, on the other hand, want them to stay big because the only way to control them is their bigness. So I think it's interesting. It's something to watch how the Biden administration deals with this. So they've got two tensions running against each other. They want to break up big tech, and yet they want to keep it all together. And we'll see in the end who... by the way, what do you think the intelligence services want? And again, put aside the Democrat, Republican. Do you think the CIA and all the other intelligence services that we have, do you think they want to break up big tech and have lots of little companies, or do you think they want a few mega companies? Well, it's obvious. They want the mega companies. It's much easier to spy on a few big companies than it is on hundreds of little ones. So again, the intelligence services are going to push against antitrust enforcement. So you're going to see this push. Those people who want to control big tech will want big tech. Those people who think, no, it's much more important to break them up, are going to have a hard time making that argument. And we might see some interesting alliances and some interesting perspectives coming out of all this. It's going to be a real mess. But what everybody wants, Jennifer gets it absolutely right. What everybody wants control. The intelligence agencies want control. The Democrats want control. The Republicans want control. The antitrust people want control. The anti-antitrust people want control. The anti-free speech people want control. Problem is when the same person is both anti-free speech and antitrust, pro-antitrust. Now they've got a conflict. And it'll be interesting to see how that conflict is resolved. That was my point. Landon asks, doesn't this show how rights are interdependent? You can't have freedom of speech without economic freedom and so forth. Yes, that's a really, really, really good point. At the end of the day, that's absolutely right. I mean, what does free speech, for example, mean if, let's say, the government owns the means of production? It doesn't mean anything, right? Particularly if it controls the means of production. Because, what we say and don't say at work is controlled by our company. That's not an issue of free speech. But if not, the government owns our workplace, then it controls what we say. And it certainly, if it can fire us for saying certain things, if the government can. So in every respect, rights are interdependent. I mean, look, it's not just that they're interdependent, they're all the same thing, right? All of it is just aspects, elements of the right to life. They're just, every right is the right to life looked at from a particular perspective. And the right to speech is an aspect of the right to liberty, which is an aspect of the right to life. And the right to life requires the right to property. And the right to property is related in many ways to the right to liberty. And part of the right to free speech is you have a right to say what you want on your property. You don't have a right to say what you want on my property. Right? So without the concept of property and without protection of property rights, then there is no meaning to the right to free speech. So yes, excellent point, Landon. Let's see. All right, Super Chat is open. Looking for some $50, $100 questions. That would be good. That would be appropriate around now. I don't have Alejandrina to bug you guys, and I don't have Alejandrina to keep score and to tell you exactly how much it's been, but I would guess we're at about, I don't know, under 200 is my guess, just under 200, somewhere around that. So we need to get to, like, on an average show needs to be around 400. Around 400. So we're at halfway. So if anybody wants to step in with 100 or 50 or cool. All right, let's see. Georgia law gives the election board new powers to intervene in county election offices and to remove and replace local election officials. I mean, I don't have a strong view on that. Again, it strikes me as that's probably right to do that. Assuming election boards are attempting to be bipartisan, and that there have to be some kind of objective criteria for removing a county official, but my guess is other states have that as well. I haven't seen that as a big one that people object to, so I haven't really read up about that, but I just don't see it as as that would, certainly that would make this a Jim Crow law. That's absurd. Do you think political hacks are using Jim Crow as a placeholder to mean anything that is anti-civil rights? Yes, but it's not clear the bill is even anti-civil rights. It might even be expanding civil rights in a sense that it expands the ability to vote. It might be actually friendly. But no, I think Jim Crow is like the way the left today uses racism. everybody's a racist unless they agree with them. And it's Jim Crow laws unless they're their laws. And so every law that is not supported by them is a discriminatory law. It's part of systemic racism. Every white person is a racist. That's part of white fragility and systemic racism. And Jim Crow is a way to taint you. Now, it is a specific thing, and they're lying about it. Jim Crow is very specific, and yet they're associating this law with it when it has nothing to do with it. Jim Crow is the institutionalization in law of racism, of discrimination, of clear laws that imply that blacks can't vote, or most blacks can't vote, or discourage blacks from vote because they don't have enough money, or because they're not literate, and yet the whites who served in the Civil War their descendants can vote because they're white, right? But they don't say white, black, but it's just clear that that's what it is. That's Jim Crow. There's nothing here that suggests any of that I can read into it. Nothing. Not to mention the whole Jim Crow segregation of schools and segregation of buses and segregation of restaurants. I mean, sanctioned by the government, not just but by the government, because government institutions were doing the same thing. A whole culture that is Jim Crow. That doesn't exist in the South, and it's not going to exist again. Explicit racism is still unaccepted in this country. People view it with contempt, justifiably, with contempt. Now, there are a lot of racists out there, but even the racists pretend not to be racists. Even the racists who come to my chat sometimes are pretending not to be racist because they know that racism in and of itself is unacceptable. Under Jim Crow, people were proud of their racism. It was that disgusting. So the fact that they're using Jim Crow and that the President of the United States would stoop to using Jim Crow to a law that has no relation to that horrible, dark era is really disgusting. Hi, Ron. I'm doing a history essay on Mao's Great Leap Forward. I'm wondering how the hell the average life expectancy increased under him. Well, I don't believe it. It did. I mean, check your sources, check your data. Did they count people dying of starvation? Because 40 to 60 million people died of starvation during the Great Leap Forward. So why you would believe numbers issued by a regime that is genocidal, I don't know. I'm sure that under Stalin, life expectancy expanded as well, because nobody was counting the 20 to 40 million or more Ukrainians who starved to death, right? So, no, I mean, that's ridiculous. In the 1960s under Mao, there were tens of millions of people who died of starvation. So, there's some great books about the Great Leap Forward, and I don't think any of them, nothing I've seen, suggests that life expectancy actually increased under him. Ayn Rand's virtues and values. Ayn Rand's virtues are virtues because they advance the individual's life. Aren't they therefore contingent on context? For example, see next box. It's easy for a businessman to be honest and have integrity in a capitalist city, but not in a mixed one where he could not fire employees. Yes, of course the virtues are contextual. You don't lie, you don't owe the truth, and you shouldn't give the truth to a rapist. You shouldn't give a truth to a murderer. Right? So so the virtues are very much contextual in that sense. But you have to be careful there. It doesn't mean, therefore, that the virtues are anything goes. You have to understand the context and the details within that context, what exactly you're doing. And a mixed economy makes it very difficult to stick by the virtues and even to hold the right context. Because when, in the face of force used against you, you don't have to tell the truth. But that's dangerous because there are a lot of business people, a lot of individuals who then use that as an excuse to lie when the context doesn't necessarily require it. They use it as an excuse not to have integrity. They use it as an excuse to fold and to do whatever they're told and to never question and to lie, cheat, and steal because, hey, we're in a mixed economy. So it's tricky on how you decide when it's okay to do what. I mean, this is a great question for somebody like John Allison who actually lived it, right? And I think everywhere he could, he stuck with the virtues because they benefited him and he knew it in the long run, even in business, even in a mixed economy. Yes, there are circumstances in which it's self-destructive and it's suicide, and therefore you can't. But differentiating them is not easy. Not easy. And that's part of the evil of a mixed economy. It requires you to do that. It requires you to think about those things. It requires you to constantly have to deal with that kind of stuff. If you were not an objectivist in an alternative universe, what philosophy do you think you would have taken? I think it would have been a Stoic. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to project because what am I, I'm not going to say I would have been something really, really bad because I can't imagine that, but I don't know. I think I would have been some kind of pragmatic virtue ethics kind of guy. I was not religious. I think I would have ultimately abandoned the nationalism that I had embraced and the socialism I'd embraced because I think I would have seen how destructive they were. I would have been a kind of a pragmatist I would have looked for virtues and then try to figure out what worked and what didn't and being more skeptical, cynical, and pragmatic probably than anything else. That's all I can think of. I know Greta is wrong, but what if current CO2 emissions really would cause Earth to heat up by, say, 10 degrees Celsius in 10 years? What is the objective solution to that since air is difficult to privatize? Well, I mean, if literally 10 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Celsius is even more than Greta is claiming. 10 degrees Celsius is massive and would have unbelievable consequences. I would say in those circumstances, the government would encourage, and I think private charities and private entrepreneurs and private individuals would massively invest in sucking in any technology that allowed us to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. I mean, we would have to do it quickly. We would have to do it fast because 10 degrees Celsius is a lot. Now, it also depends on where's the heating happening. But yeah, I think that's objectively catastrophic. I mean, Stephanie doesn't seem to think so. But I think 10 degrees centigrade is potentially catastrophic. And if you assume that it's caused by CO2, again, a big assumption, then suck them out. Now, it's not clear to me that CO2 could result in a 10 degree centigrade, I mean, just scientifically, could result in a 10 degree warming because CO2, I mean, it's all self-correcting. CO2, for example, helps plants thrive. Plants suck in CO2. So it's you can create a fictitious world in which CO2 rising raises temperatures by 10 degrees Celsius, and then you have to say, I have to get rid of the CO2. So you suck it out of the earth. You don't stop producing it because that would kill more people than the increase in temperature. You have to suck it out of the atmosphere. But there's a lot of ifs in there, right? A lot of ifs. And you would still have to rely on voluntary action. The government wouldn't have a right to steal my money because they believe in this idea. But I'm with Luca and Stephanie. Generally, warm is good. The scariest thing about climate, the scariest thing about climate, is another ice age. And you don't need a man-made ice age, because ice ages have happened in the past. Imagine if glaciers reached down to New York. I mean, that's scary. And that's very difficult to deal with. Hotter weather we can deal with air conditioning. Glaciers are very hard to live with. Very hard to live with. Right? So, look, I'm not a climate scientist. I get, and I know a lot of you would like me to really dig into the CO2. You know, I kind of trust Alex on this, and you know, it doesn't matter to me it matters what the science is true and what's not. I don't trust the Greens for a variety of reasons, but the actual science is, you know, I can't be an expert on anything, and so Alex is expert at that, and I leave that to him. But in my perspective on the actual science is no science could justify shutting down fossil fuels. It doesn't matter what the science is. That it can't be the solution. There might be problems that justify taking massive investments, but the massive investments can't be solar and wind and shutting down fossil fuels. There might be nuclear. It might be sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. I don't know. I'll leave that to you guys to figure out. But it can be, that's my you know, take on this. And if I had the energy and the time, I would dig into this. Luca is suggesting checking out Net Zero 2050. Net Zero 2050 sounds like a bad site, but I guess it's a good site. And see what they claim on CO2. I don't know what they claim. What are they claiming on CO2? That CO2 will drive up 10 degrees centigrade? I mean, that's just nonsense. That's just nonsense. I'm also an economist, and if you know, even if the claims are true, it still doesn't make any sense to invest now in anything, because in 100 years we'll be so much richer they can take care of this. This is Patrick Moore's latest book, is Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. Yeah, I've seen that. I saw that. I think Alex recommended it. And I like Patrick Moore, and I like the whole idea of fake catastrophes. And I've been talking about that forever. You know, this is how I deal with a lot of this stuff is, I'm a finance guy, right? So if you come to me with an investment idea, my first response is to ask you how you've done in the past. Because investment is about predicting the future. How have you done in predicting the future in the past? And if you tell me all my predictions have turned out wrong, I'm not going to invest in a new fund. So the first thing when I look at global warming is I look at who are these people and what have they predicted in the past. And I look and I see, it's quite obvious that everything they predicted in the past has been false, never happened. Why would I even start to take them seriously? See, that is so discrediting that I'm not motivated to go research the science, because they're not credible right off the bat in my view. Just right off the bat. How will a big tech breakup affect the equities market? Also, it seems like 90% of the antitrust argument anymore are just envy and fear of size. Yeah, I mean, 90% of the antitrust has always been envy and fear of size. That was what the Mudrakers did in the 19th century. That's why they went after Standard Oil. It was basically envy and fear of size. It has nothing to do with anything economics. It has nothing to do with anything in real world. It's all about envy. What would happen? A big tech breakup effect on equity? It depends. I mean, competitors would view it as a positive. Some tech companies, you might argue, that are worth more broken up than they are one entity. I don't know that, but you could argue that. It might turn out that they are. Hard to tell. Standard Oil, when it was broken up, the pieces were worth more than the whole had been before. But that's so hard to judge, because before everybody knew it was going to be broken up, so it was already priced for kind of a worst case scenario. So it's very hard to tell. But generally, I don't think that the equities markets are necessarily a good measure of whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Lucas says, tell the truth, Yaron. You edited chapter 1 of Alex's The Markets of Fossil Fuels, which talks about all the wrong predictions for the climate doomsday for 60 years. Did I edit it? I don't think I did. I mean, maybe. I don't remember. I don't remember. But, I mean, I've known about these false predictions forever, going back to Silent Spring, going back to global cooling, going back to Ehrlich's population bomb. I mean, that to me is enough to disqualify for the fact that Ehrlich is a climate, scaremonger is enough to disqualify the whole thing. I don't think I edited anything. I don't think I edited Alex's book, anything in Alex's book. Yeah. Any good book recommendations that are relevant to your talking points today? I've listened to 2 or 3 audiobooks you have suggested on your show. All have been very good. Well, I would definitely read The Markets for Fossil Fuel if you haven't. Relevant to... No, I'm terrible with book recommendations. I'll have to make a... No, so nothing from... What did we talk about today? The election law, no. Easter, no. Oh, Easter, there's a good book about Constantine and about I forget, but it's about the early Christianity. Fascinating book about early Christianity and how it was used for political means and how it was shaped by the needs of Rome. And it was something with Constantine in the name. I'll find the book. It's on its way to Puerto Rico from California, so it's in a box somewhere. And then Antitrust and Free Speech. No, but I'll try to have more book recommendations when I do this. Federal Trade Commission is now using antitrust laws to prevent vertical healthcare mergers that would streamline their businesses, Illumina and Grail, etc. Whoops. This could destroy innovation and lives, deserves a show, thoughts. Yeah, I agree. It deserves a show. You could sponsor one on it. But yeah, the Federal Trade Commission is awful. It was starting to be really awful under Trump, and it's for a long time they were kind of quiet. I'd say from Reagan until Obama, they were kind of quiet, and they really become more aggressive under Trump, and now I think they'll be even more aggressive under Biden. So watch out innovators, watch out investors, watch out for our quality and standard of living, absolutely. But I'll look at the Illumina and Grail specifically to see if I can make a show out of that. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the super chatters for the support. Thank you all for listening and being here today. We'll be back on tomorrow night, maybe with Greg on to finish what we started yesterday. Maybe we'll do something completely different. We'll see. Let's see. Should U.S. Mint stop making pennies? Do we need it? No, I don't think we need pennies. I think it's ridiculous that the U.S. Mint is making pennies. I don't think we should mint any coins. I think we should, banks should be responsible for currency, and the federal government should have no involvement in the currency. Ryan says you should do a show on the 5-part HBO miniseries Chernobyl. It's very good. Here's to start a fund for that. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I watched Chernobyl. I enjoyed it in a weird way. But yes, I think it is very good. Although nothing about it surprised me. It was kind of, in a sense, obvious. That's what I reduced my enjoyment of it, because there were no surprises. It was kind of everybody behaved exactly the way I'd expect them to behave. All right. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. We should be well over 100 likes, so don't forget to like the show. Just press the like button. It helps the algorithms. If you didn't like the show, you can press the other button, but I hope to see more engagement. Let's see, share the show, share to your friends. That's how we're going to grow this. And of course, you can support the show on YBS.com/support. Scientism is an anti-concept, psycho speak. It's a classic, perfect example of an anti-concept and of a package deal. There is no such thing as scientism. It refers to a phenomena that exists, but in and of itself, it is a package deal and an anti-concept. And that is no question about that. There's absolutely no question about that. All right, let's see. Yes, you can support me on Patreon, on Subscribestar, and on Locals. See you all. See you all tomorrow. And you should all watch the show with Greg that we did yesterday in the cleaned up version that just went up while the show was going on, I think. You can get the whole sense of it. I thought it was very good. A lot of great points without all the technical problems. Bye, everybody.